the wisdom together, and we can ask for God to give us what we need. We're in the beginning of Ash. We're not the beginning of Ash Wednesday. We're in the beginning of Lent, which starts with Ash Wednesday. That was Wednesday I mentioned. We saw the video with the dust. We're looking at mortality. There's wisdom writings in the Old Testament, a book called Ecclesiastes. The teacher's name is Kohelet. He concludes that it's all vapor. He says, the Hebrew word is hevel. For a long time, I feel like maybe for the 60s, almost through the early 2000s, it was translated meaningless. And then the more people understood Hebrew mysticism and sort of looked back and really started digging into what this wisdom teacher was saying, he's not saying meaningless, he's saying life is vapor, meaning it's impermanent. It doesn't last, it comes and goes. The fleeting moment, the breath that we call life, it is not a specific length, it's not a guarantee, it's not a predictable amount of time, it's life. It's what you get while you got it, and when it's gone, it's over. The journey in its entirety, from the cradle to the grave, from our first breath until our breath becomes air. Israel wanders for 40 years in the wilderness, and wilderness is the title of today's text, because then Jesus comes along and he sort of symbolically replicates Israel's wandering in the wilderness for 40 years with his testing in the wilderness for 40 days. In the liturgical sensibility, the religious sensibility with the number 40, is that it's got this clear connection to the biblical understanding of a long time. When you hear the number 40, it means a long time. It also means it's maybe a season of struggle where people grow up. That's kind of the biblical story of 40. 40 is a long time. 40 is a lifetime. And life, part of what Lent does is it reminds us that life includes death, that death is a part of life, and that because of that, because life is impermanent, life is really sweet, right? So counter to the misunderstood wisdom, right? Life is not meaningless because it's impermanent. Life is actually full of meaning because it's impermanent, because it doesn't last. Each of these moments is invested with incredible meaning. So in the season of Lent, for the 40 days between now and Easter, we're doing what I call, we're creating a liturgical near-death experience. The idea is in these 40 days, we come face to face with death, with mortality. We remind ourselves that life is fragile and frail, and I think we hardly have to do that in this room. We know that. But that life somehow holds together these really fascinating arrangements of dust and breath. And so during Lent, we aim to breathe, not just as an autonomical physiological response, right? We don't just breathe because we have to survive, but we aim to breathe on purpose, right? Maybe we could think of the season of Lent as the time during the year where we gasp for breath, where we realize, man, it's been months since I've taken a breath. And in Lent we go, oh my gosh, that's how my brain is supposed to work when I have enough oxygen, right? I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath about problems in my life, and holding my breath about politics, and holding my breath about work, and holding my breath about, and in Lent we go, oh, I didn't realize I had not been taking these full breaths that I need. And so even as we struggle to breathe sometimes, we realize again that life is fleeting, that life is for living, and that even in the face of death, each of us would choose the mess and the pain and the broken promises of being alive, given the alternative. Because somewhere deep down, we all have this seed of faith inside of us that somewhere, somehow, in our story, love will be stronger than death. Some of us don't even know where that came from, but it's alive in there somehow. And so maybe in these days we can allow this proximity to death, this honesty about the frailty of life, maybe we can let it change us as a part of our practice. Maybe this season uh, we can be a church that's death positive, in the sense that our whole thing is not trying to find a solution to get around death. We're not trying to dismiss death or pretend it away, but we're the group of people that both claim faith and we say, look, death is an important part of life. Can this make us appreciate what we have more? Can it give us some focus about our lives? So Lent puts us in the proximity of death and the presence of ashes and these symbols, not just of our inevitable passing, but of time passing. And so the Christian tradition for a couple thousand years has asked us to prepare for Jesus' death and resurrection, which is about 40 days away, by being intentional with this season of mindfulness, of self-reflection, of intention, and to mark that intention, to remind ourselves of death in our own bodies. And so we began with ashes, right? This powerful symbol that brings us to the very beginning of the story where God breathes the Spirit into dust. And on Ash Wednesday, we say that we know we came from that, and we know that we'll go back to that. And in today's text, we move from dust to wilderness, and we find Jesus tempted, right? Israel leaves Egypt and wanders for 40 years in the wilderness, and in that wandering, they find out who they are. They learn their identity in that struggle. Jesus is tempted for these 40 days in the wilderness, and he sort of reaffirms his identity. Or some scholars think, he's just come up out of being baptized in the Jordan. This is really the beginning of his ministry in the Gospel of Mark. So he goes and sort of affirms who he is. And the way he does it is in the face of what I would call imitation love. We all grew up without enough real love in our lives, without enough unconditional love, right? Our parents didn't give us enough because their parents didn't give them enough, and their parents didn't give them enough. So we grew up with a deficit, and we know we need it. And so as people, we go after, if we can't get real love, if we can't get unconditional love, people who look at us and see us for who we are and love us anyway, if we can't get that, we go after imitation love. And I'm stealing this from a guy called Greg Bayer. I'll tell you the story another time. But he basically says imitation love takes 4 forms: praise, power, pleasure, and safety. So when we can't get real love, we will go after imitation love in the form of praise, power, pleasure, and safety. And Jesus is led out into the wilderness and is tempted by the devil, or you see the little numbers in our text that say that could be translated differently: the deceiver, the accuser. Jesus is led into the wilderness, and he's offered what first? Anybody remember? Bread. Yeah, right? You've got these stones, turn them into bread, right? I don't know about you guys, but for me, food is pleasure. So we'll say that could be either pleasure or maybe sustenance. Got pleasure. Then what's next? The devil takes them and shows them what? All the kingdoms of the earth. Yeah, power and praise. He says they'll all worship you, right? So we've got pleasure, we've got power and praise, and then what's the last one? Safety. Yeah, he says, go to the top of the temple, throw yourself off the angels. So this is the deceiver coming to Jesus, who is in our faith, in our tradition, in our sacred text. He's the one who has integrity in his true self, right? His yes is yes, his no is no. He says what he's going to do. He does what he's going to say. He has an opportunity here to give in one after another to these forms of imitation love, and he resists it. He resists it. The season of Lent, and I'm not going to make assumptions, right? Culturally, we're not at a place where we can assume anybody knows what Lent is, or even that, that historically people have used it to give things up. I think all that I need to say is that this can be a season for each of us where we intentionally dial back our appetites for imitation love. Right, where we acknowledge where in our lives am I going, and where am I going after power because I feel insecure? Or where am I going after pleasure because it's within my control and I like how it makes me feel? Where am I going after safety because I don't feel safe? This is a season where we can acknowledge that the thing we're really after is real love, but we've built these really elaborate and very functional systems of imitation love. For me, it's Starbucks, it's movies, right? It's getting stuff checked off my to-do list. It's feeling accomplished at work, right? We have these things, and the point of Lent is not value judgment because this is not a purity culture, right? This is a redemptive culture. We're here every week. We confess. We say we know we can't do it all right, but this is the season where we aim to acknowledge that we're going after imitation love in some really pretty recognizable and repetitive ways. And maybe this season we can go, you know what, I'm going to dial it back a little bit. Maybe I can use the energy that I've been spending to accumulate the praise of other people. Maybe I can use that just to sit in the presence of God and be reminded that my value doesn't come from making other people happy. And whatever the practice is, it's not for me to tell you because you're the one that knows it, right? You know what the easiest form of imitation love is that you go after. I am a tried and true, lifelong, won't ever be fully recovered people pleaser. And it's pretty easy for me to tell when it's going off the rails. And it's very easy in a season like Lent for me to stop and step back and go, okay. With a very little bit of effort, I can look at my life and see where am I really going after these things in unhealthy ways? From what we heard in the text, from Jesus' temptations, and from these sort of four things that we're talking about, praise, power, pleasure, and safety, I wonder if any of you would be willing to share just a reflection, or this is how I've seen that, or maybe this is where I could sort of use some work during the Lenten season. Speaking to anyone that wants to share? Okay, well, I wanted to make sure we open the floor. So the symbol, I guess the metaphor we should say, of the season of Lent, but really of the Christian tradition, is death and resurrection. So the invitation is, we do this every year. We acknowledge that as people, this is a part of how we grow, is that we move through these cycles, and maybe we grow a little bit each time. It's a season of asking, how is it that we can allow to die these forms of imitation love, so that when we get to Easter, we're ready to be raised into real love. And let's close maybe with a reflection on how this feels from the other side. Maybe we have opportunities in the next 40 days to give people real love. And it's more expensive than imitation love. It requires you to be present. And it requires you to be gracious. To give someone real love, you've got to see them for who they are, who they really are, all the way down. Disagreements and all. And you choose to love them anyway. You see them entirely as they are and love them anyway. That's a lot harder than giving someone praise, isn't it? Oh, you did great. No, great job. No, really, you did good. Right? Or giving someone power. Hey, would you take the lead on this project? That'd be good. That would make them feel good. Right? Or pleasure. Hey, I appreciate you. I got you a gift card. There's all sorts of ways, and these are not bad, right? Be kind, give people gifts. It's not the same thing. Will you have opportunities in the next 40 days to be so present to someone that you can give them that gift? You can be one of the people who actually contributes to that real love tank that they have, that they so need to fill. And they're being told by everyone else and everything else, right? That they're just one more hit of imitation love away from finally being fulfilled, finally being satisfied, finally having the life that they want. And we all know it's a farce, But we live in the system, and so it's very hard to play any other game. The season of Lent says, right? Not all year, not forever, but for 40 days, would you be intentional? Would you acknowledge that there's at least a handful of ways that you go after imitation love? And maybe in this season you can dial it back. And there's at least a handful of people for whom you settle for giving imitation love. And maybe in this season you can slow down and make a choice and pay the cost to be a friend, to be a neighbor, to give the person the thing they need, even though there's nothing in it for you other than to see them and love them. I hope this can be true for us. I hope this is our practice of the season of Lent. I believe it's what Jesus desires for us and from us. Amen. Let us reflect with more music, shall we?